the key piece, like from the practical and also theory around co-production, is often this piece around like sort of power dynamics. So this is the piece that oftentimes when translating collaboration or things that are like working with others, right? Like co-production is a very basic form of working. There's not really there's some specifics to how to do it and some like finesse and some ways to be more elegant around it. But largely it's not, I mean, it's not like a foreign concept to most people, right? Like collaborating with other people is pretty basic to human nature, very social. But I think as with a lot of things, when you academicize them or make them more formal, it feels like there's a lot more pressure involved. And so that's like kind of the most basic overview to me. It's like sort of collaboration with some additional things to consider around it. And so that's a lot of the conceptualization around co-production that I've encountered, is this sort of what isn't exactly collaboration about this. And often that, like I mentioned, comes down to kind of assessment of power dynamics, assessment of sort of who are the specific parties. A lot of what I've encountered around co-production or co-development, or a lot of the co-anythings are is around like bringing in groups where there's an unevenness of like power distribution or decision-making power, or sort of epistemology, right? Like where people are coming from and how they know what they know, and sort of the where those things all meet. I think none of that, maybe some of this is relevant for the AEOIP. What do you guys call your group? Do you use the acronym? It's an actual question.
We use it
various forms.
Clumsily,
but we do.
Okay, because I was talking about
I usually transpose a few letters in there myself and do it wrong, but
yeah. Is it the I and the O? Those are the ones that I keep transposing.
Yeah, because it's AEIOU, and no, it's AEOIP.
Yep.
So
yeah,
sorry.
Yeah.
That's the fun with this group.
Yeah, sure. Vowels P. So anyway, so I think probably in the acronym for those groups, it's probably not as relevant, because I think it seems like it's primarily folks from NASA and folks from the Forest Service that are kind of make up the bulk of the folks who are going to be sort of the high level collaborators and who make up the partnership and who are getting together. And in cases like that, it's sometimes less of a concern to, as a social scientist, I hesitate to say, like, don't think about power dynamics, because you should always think about power dynamics. But yeah, Jessica, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, sorry, I have a question. And maybe I misinterpreted it, because you just repeated the word power dynamics, but there was some sort of like knowledge dichotomy that you mentioned. And I do wonder from other folks, like, I feel like on the end user side of house, we have a spectrum of folks who are familiar with Earth observations or remote sensing, ranging from I know it exists to I make it and model with it. So I guess I'm curious if there's any immediate reaction to that from you, Keir, and perhaps also some of the folks in the room.
Yeah, I mean, well, I guess I can let folks in the room if there are other. I'm super open to people just sort of jumping in. Also, I like the idea of a conversation more than like a lecture. But I mean, my immediate thought is like there are all sorts of different ways to have power differentials. Some of it comes from like authority, right? You can have like a decision maker, and that person has a particular kind of authority power that is vested in them by their role. You also have like sort of all the sort of spectrums that people can be on. There's like gender and race and ethnicity and religion and all that sort of stuff that like has a social burden to it, or a social implication that can influence power dynamics in like interpersonal interactions, which often happen when you have a collaboration or co-production. There are also sort of broader cultural and social things where you can have like social groups that are contributing particular types of knowledge or information to a collaboration that their way of knowing. This often comes up with collaborations with Indigenous groups, where you have a way of knowing that's coming into a space, and it's coming up against another way of knowing that's more sort of usually positivist and sort of, data and science driven. And those, the ways that they come together and get recognized in wherever the co-production is happening or wherever the collaboration is happening, that can influence what comes out the other side, right? And so, like privilege, right? So if there are particular types of knowledge or ways of knowing, or where the knowledge comes from that have more that have different levels of power, right, or recognition or respect within a space. Yeah, go ahead. Someone was.
Oh, that was an open mic. My apologies.
Okay. Excited contribution. But yeah, so yes. So if there are coming into a space, like I say space, right? Like this is like the conference or a meeting, or is what I mean by space, like a physical space or like an online space where people are getting together and meeting. If there's, or interacting, some people who are like very fit, like if it's a technical document and people are collaborating on it, for example, to be like a very concrete example, you have like a shared document and some people, and it's framed initially as like a technical document. Potential collaborators who aren't as well versed in that terminology, or to, for example, know that Earth observation exists and maybe like something about a satellite, but don't feel like experts, might feel less inclined to comment or to provide insights on that document, even if they have something to contribute. And so that's where kind of the thoughtfulness on the front end of co-production comes in, that if you want whatever groups of people, potential stakeholders, to contribute to whatever it is, a shared document, a meeting, that there's thought given ahead of time to, what's their perspective, what's their position, are there places where they might feel on their back foot, or like that they don't have particular types of power that might make their contributions, or where that perceived differential of power would mean that they're not contributing what they could, or not kind of meeting their potential in that document or in that meeting. And so that's where a lot of the emphasis from the folks who think a lot about this kind of thing comes in, is like, you want everyone to feel like they can show up kind of authentically and like from themselves and bring, because the point of having them there is that they're bringing their perspectives, right? They're bringing the value that they have to that space and to that collaboration. And so you don't want them kind of not showing up and not bringing that because they feel like it's not necessary, or that it's not valued. And some of that just comes from like the messaging and framing at the beginning of like how you welcome people and how things are framed and how, like the titles of workshops and things like that. Sorry, Andrew, did you have a comment, or is this an open mic situation too?
Yeah, sorry, I just cleared my throat. That's all. Nothing. I'll turn my mic off.
Oh, someone lost audio. Can other folks hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah, I can hear it loud and clear.
Okay, good. Sorry, Jenny. So yeah, Jessica sent me a list of things like we can talk about specifically for this meeting if, like ways to work co-production in, and I'm happy to talk about that, but I'm also like, there are a lot of directions a conversation about co-production can go. So I'm also happy to kind of take direction from you guys if there's stuff that I said that maybe makes sense but doesn't seem actionable, or that all sounds really sort of nice and fine and you're all ready to go on it and you're like, I know what co-production is now and I can totally do it. But I have like slides that I started to prepare, but I don't know how useful they are.
Let me ask
Sure.
a question. So I don't know if we've met. I'm Frenchie Morissette with the kind of co-chairing AEOIP this year with Jess, and really excited about your interest and ability to come to this workshop. I've worked with co-production and Karina Wyborn on that article a little bit when I was with the North Central Climate Science Center and Indigenous communities, and a bit with some of the other folks, Allison Meadows and whatnot, on some of the stuff they've done earlier. So it's great to see. And I think I would put that we got almost like 2 issues, I think. One is the workshop itself. There's going to be an opportunity to co-produce because we're going to get some updates from some of the center teams, and there's going to be people from the land management side, and maybe they can start to think about things. If that happens, it's probably going to be very preliminary and introductory, but it could happen. And the second issue might be like just generically how the group AEOIP thinks about co-production moving forward, how we can facilitate it or how we set the stage for proper co-production, sort of like the meta co-production conversation that we could have during the workshop. So I think there's those 2 threads. And for the first one, both maybe, is it seems to me what we might have you look at the spectrum in that paper of various communities that can come together, and we are almost just all research kind of. Well, there's the practitioner side, but it's government, land management. So yeah, it's not just research, but it's not this full spectrum of bringing in all the voices to the table, and that's focused, and that's good. And it seems like it's a very innocent but maybe implicit knowledge assumption that both groups come to the table with. Like, of course, what spout out 40 different acronyms that are familiar to everybody at NASA, or you would know what I mean by incident command or whatnot in the Forest Service. So just a couple thoughts, but I think we got kind of this issue of you helping us with co-producing at the meeting and thinking about co-production, and then it seems to me just this implicit knowledge assumptions are maybe something we should, just listening to you talk, start the meeting off making. How do we make sure any knowledge assumptions are legitimate, and if we need to back up and make sure that the knowledge is shared, or we can point people to the right information before proceeding and leaving people kind of in the dark, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, my first thought when you said that is like, yeah, I mean, knowledge assumptions can be a really like the messaging around them too, right? Because like we all don't know lots of stuff, but the thing to be sort of on guard, the thing to be on guard for at these would be like this, moving ahead with something and implying that people should know something can, for some people, depending on the participants, and I don't know who all's going to be there, right? Like make people want to show up less because they feel like they don't belong. It can feel exclusionary, even if that's not at all sort of an intent. And so, it can help to have someone like me or like somebody else in an audience who has some sort of perceived authority, or, like it's not someone down on the bottom of a rung or whatever. You're not putting the people who might most be on the back foot in the position where they have to raise their hand and ask the question, but have someone else say like, you hear an acronym and you just like raise your hand and say like, hey, I don't know what that means. Would you mind spelling that out for everyone? And then it gives the speaker the opportunity to be like, oh, that's right. That's, what is it? Expert blindness, I think is the term, where you gain lots and lots of knowledge and you sort of forget that you had to learn it at some point, and you sort of assume that this is just things that everyone knows. But everything has to get learned. And so, right. So acronyms are a really obvious place for that to come in, but there's jargon everywhere. And it is useful, right? There are good reasons to have jargon and shorthand. But when you do have like a co-production space or a place where people are going to be coming together, it is really helpful to have someone, even just have a best practice. And you can lay this as a ground rule to say like, for this conference, we're going to try to spell out all acronyms. Maybe, NASA maybe is one, US, whatever, USFS. I don't know if people even call it that, but there are some ones that we, maybe we'll assume that we know these ones, but for anything that's specific to a mission or specific to a practice, try to spell it out. And then that even gives people just license to ask that question. And so that's like some of these ground setting things can be really helpful for making the space more friendly for co-production.
That's great.
Am I calling on people? Amanda, go for it.
Hi, long-time listener, first-time caller. No, I'm just kidding. No, I really like. So, Jeff, I liked your comment. I was thinking about this, and I really like the concept here, and trying to figure out how to bring it to fruition. In the workshop setting. I don't know if have you. So Birgit is on here too. Birgit, I don't know if you mind me putting you on the spot a little bit. A couple of years ago, when we had the AEOIP workshop, we invited Rich Bernkoff to talk about who owns the Arrow, and we were sort of coming at it at the time from like, you know, this is a partnership where we're trying to foster, you know, engagement and you know, sort of promote the uptake of Earth observation data, and then at the same time, you know, also be in a setting where we can, you know, open up a conversation and listen to the needs of the land management community, and try to, you know, help, you know, make that a feedback loop where, you know, the land management community can also inform, you know, what the next NASA satellite missions or priorities might be, you know, based on their needs and things like that. But there's sort of this idea behind it of like, you know, who's in charge, like who is doing so. In I don't know if it's like kind of counter to code production in terms of like the power dynamic, if there's like the absence of power, if everybody's kind of going like, I don't know who's in charge or who's supposed to be the one driving that bus. And it was a really interesting talk that we had back then about it. I'd have to go back into the notes and remember it. But I really like the idea of going, you know, forward at this workshop with this concept. And I wonder if you, if the Rich Bernkoff stuff kind of rings any bells for you, you know, in your experience, and whether, you know, if you could talk a little bit about, you know, that kind of concept with co-production of like, if there isn't, you know, say a leadership, you know, if it's sort of a ground up organization and there's a whole bunch of different people, and yeah, you know, Forest Service and NASA are maybe the two biggest participants right now, but we also have, you know, USGS and, you know, ORNL and, you know, a couple of other federal agencies, and then also like academics and things that are also involved. So yeah, so I just wanted to see kind of what your thoughts were on that. And I don't know.
Yeah, no, this is a very interesting. I was like taking mental notes and then trying to take physical notes while you were.
Yeah, sorry, I just kind of like vomited words.
No, it's all good words. So that there's, I think, let me start with one idea and then try to move forward in a reasonably organized way. We'll see how it goes. So my first thought is the delineation of roles and responsibilities tends to be a really important component to, with caveats, but really important component to doing sort of good functional co-production, especially if you have like the more discrete the space in which you're doing the co-production. So like a meeting, for example, when it has like a start date and an end date, and you know, you're supposed to accomplish some things within that. Within that framework, having roles and responsibilities well delineated can be really helpful, so people know. Like people do this all the time, right? So like telling people like, this is, you know, put this hat on, people can do that, right? They bring them their whole selves, but they're like, okay, right now, this is the perspective I'm bringing. So that's like one, it's helpful for a lot of reasons to have those kind of roles and responsibilities, especially if there's like a facilitator of a conversation. So no, let me finish that first thought. So the roles and responsibilities, very, very helpful. Also in the context of goal setting. So knowing what you're working towards is, so I guess roles, responsibilities, and goals. So like, and that the goal can be co-produced, but you then like that co-production moment is we're producing a goal. At the end of this conversation, there will be a goal that we agree on. And you can, I mean, there are a lot of different ways to set that up, but often you have a mediator or a facilitator who's facilitating that discussion, and they're sort of maybe writing things on a whiteboard or a flip chart or something, and like making sure everyone gets heard. And then, you know, at some point making a decision, and it can be up to them to just make a decision. And sometimes that's like, okay, this isn't perfect. We're moving forward with this one. We're going to put these ideas in. So the parking lot is a common one. I also have heard people call it a nursery, which I think is really nice. We're like, we're going to keep these as seedling ideas. We'll revisit them later. We still hope they grow, but you know, anyway, that was a brief aside. But the parking lot idea where you say like, okay, we're moving forward with this one for now. It seems achievable, whatever. So you can have a facilitator or a mediator who does that, who takes on that role, where there's not a leader in, ideally it's someone who doesn't have a vested interest in any of the sort of groups that are present. I don't know how hard that person would be defined, or how many spaces you would need to have for that. But it can be really helpful to have, like, they have authority to like make the decision, but they're not like on anyone's specific team. So that can be a helpful thing in these co-production-y spaces. Have like a kind of neutral party who actually has the ultimate authority, or who just mediates, right? Who says like, I'm running the voting, or whatever it is, if you do a democratic or whatever process. What was the other? And the goal setting exercise can also be a space where people can sort of bring their own vision and share it, so that not only do you have your own agenda kind of, but you're also listening to everyone else's agenda and getting a sense of where there might be overlap, or places where there's an opportunity to collaborate further. So even if it's not a goal that's going to get pursued in that whatever the next step is, that you're that you can sort of find that person or that unit later on and say like, hey, let's follow up on this other thing that it turns out we have in common, or we might be able to help each other there too. Ideally, that's like all in one thing, but for this meeting, it can be helpful to have that kind of like vision setting, you know, those exercises where everyone says like, well, what are you hoping to get out of this conference? And it gives, or this meeting, and it gives everyone at least like a thing that they're shooting for. And then also sometimes you can get in those, you know, like, I want a document to come out of this that, you know, provides guidance for whatever. Like, I don't know what people might want to produce, but or I want to influence this process, or I want, you know, whatever it is. I'm not going to come up with more examples because I have so little knowledge about this particular context, but those sorts of things. And then that can help to guide then how you actually run the meeting, right? Depending on what people actually, the people who show up, what they're hoping to get out of it. Those are some of the thoughts I had. Did I miss? Is that at all what you were talking about, first of all?
Yes. Yeah. No, I think it's good. I think it as you're talking it to me, it sounds a little bit like, you know, to have the most success, you know, at trying this in a workshop setting, we probably need to have some concept of what it is, or at least, you know, that we need to be actually producing something if we're going to enter into, you know, the co-production. So then the question maybe to the group is kind of like, what are we aiming to produce from this workshop, and then back up from there and go sort of down the road of like, you know, maybe there could be different facilitators that, you know, and maybe run the voting at the end or something like that. But that's kind of where my mind went when you're talking about it. Do you think that is something that is necessary, or can a co-production also be thinking about like ideas, you know, just producing ideas, not actually concrete anything?
It can be all, right? And I think, I mean, it can even be building a relationship and like rapport, right? Like, one of your goals can be, I want to have a better idea of what the vision for Earth observation is from these 3 additional perspectives that I just don't have insights on. Or I want to get to know my colleagues in whatever agency is better. Like, those can all be, and those are helpful, right? Those are functional goals towards an end of making better products, right? You can sort of map those on like, ultimately, we want to be making, you know, like this is like vision versus mission, right? You have a vision of, you know, we want Earth observation to be whatever, fill in the blank. You guys know better than I do, but like that, we want it to be that in the future. The reason we're in this partnership to begin with is because we think talking to all of us together have something to contribute to achieving that vision. We're not going to achieve that vision today, but we can move towards it, right? And these are maybe some steps that we see as the next steps on that journey to that vision of a, you know, idyllic future. So yeah, I mean, any of the components that you think will help get there can be perfectly acceptable goals for a meeting, right? And you might move partway towards some and achieve others and that kind of thing. But yeah, it doesn't have to be like a product as such. And sorry,
okay. Cool. Yeah, Sabrina, I'm like, yeah, I'll pass the baton. Go ahead, Sabrina.
Because I talked over you.
Thank you. This is a great discussion. Just thinking about your question, Amanda, and what you said, Kira. Thank you so much. You know, I think since we begun, we've done a lot of listening about needs, about you know, what we want to get out of the AEIOP as a partnership. And I think one of our long-term goals has been to sort of formulate or try to foment communities of practice, right? And I see this workshop that we're hosting this year. It's been a little different since, you know, compared to the other ones that we've hosted before, in that it has a theme, well, you know, like a more focused theme, being fire. And it's also using sort of this unconference style, right, which is very user-centered. So we're putting the users first. We're definitely going to listen more, but I think where we need sort of your expertise and just help, perhaps, would be in this reflection and how we can respond to our listening. So, you know, it'd be great if out of, you know, at the end of this meeting, we could have perhaps sort of created or, you know, helped create a community of practice of sorts for whatever the most pending needs are for the fire community, for example. And I know I realize that touches a lot of other areas, but you know, something like this. And it gets to that reflexive co-production. And I shared, you know, I learned about this through one of my equity and environmental justice PIs, and I shared the link to his publication there. But, you know, just having that cycle of reflecting and acting on what we're listening as part of that sharing of knowledge, and yeah, and making sure that we're producing something that is useful, right? So yeah, so those are my thoughts for based on what I've heard.
That's great. So some of the sort of thoughts I've come in. So this is, yeah, if there's a goal, like I don't know what the past meetings have looked like, but getting clear on sort of your goals, or like people were always talking about like what does success look like, right? As this, like, as soon as you start to lose your way, you have to go back to that square one and just say like, what is, you know, after this conference, if you have like a month later, if you're having your, or a week later, a day later, whatever, you're having your like debrief, how'd we do, how'd it go meeting, what do you want to be able to say about what happened and what you got out of it? And like, yes, that, you know, we achieved our goals. This was a successful conference. I don't know what those things would be for you guys, but it sounds like, you know, informing, I don't know, is it like building the relationships where we feel like closer, sort of emotionally, or like I understand my colleagues better, I know their needs, I know their constraints better than I did before. We have mapped out what the limitations of current Earth observations are for application in, you know, fire management, and, you know, maybe that's not actionable right now, but that can inform future missions. Again, I have no idea what I'm talking about, but things like that, or things, you know, sort of Mad Libs for that kind of thing, right? You fill in the blank for, you know, we understand the constraints of X for Y outcome better now, and so for future Z, we can make better decisions, or we can formulate that better, design that better, more effectively towards that particular goal. The other thing could be identifying like champions or allies in other organizations who are like, that's a person, you know, like we identified these 4 people on these 4 topics who are like people who have the passion and the knowledge to like run with an idea, and they could be a total point person for, you know, running down that data or running down that end user or whatever. Like those are all things that could look like success for this, but I don't know what those are. But knowing those can help you design the conference better, because you know then kind of how to formulate each of the things that you can formulate, or the design components of the workshop, to be more effective towards getting those goals, if that makes sense. Does that make sense?
Yes, very much so. Thank you.
Okay. May have been too big. Sometimes I'm trying to like step back and like speak a little bit more generally, in part because I don't know the right specifics for this, but you know.
And Amanda, you're suggesting a Mad Libs, science Mad Libs at the workshop.
Absolutely, science Mad Libs. Yeah.
She mentioned it. I was like, oh my gosh, that'd be awesome. run out a breakout that way. That would be really cool. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot here that we could really, there's a lot of directions that we could really go. So it sounds like, you know, we need to just figure out which is the best way to go. I think in our past workshops, to kind of answer sort of your question a little bit, we were more generalized. And this is the first workshop that we're having that has a little bit more of a focal area of science. And so I could see a scenario of you know, maybe some production of something to do with the focal area. And I think, you know, if we are going to continue having the workshop in this, you know, with different focal areas each year, which is something that's been floated, then maybe that's something that could be, you know, how of how we might, you know, tackle this idea of co-production in the workshop, because I think a lot of the other stuff, you know, is very broader. I think in the past, you know, we've had a lot of really good engaging discussions, and most of them have been around how to you know, how to just foster a partnership, how to like communicate, how to do science together without funding, basically, because, you know, this hasn't been something that's been funded in the past very much. So yeah, I don't know if anybody else wants to add.
I have a definite concrete idea that I'd like for the co-production. I'm a research engineer and I build models for the land managers, and the land managers I was working with, I didn't realize that are actually other researchers. I didn't realize we had a problem until I actually got to be a land manager. I got to deploy as a burned area emergency response person, and I realized we're engineers, researchers making models for researchers. We are really not making them for the land manager. So I'm desperate to get the actual boots on the ground to talk with my development team, because we make things so complex. We've got like 100 buttons, and I'm like, you really don't have time to figure out what all these buttons are when you're deployed on a fire. But I can't quite convince my others, so maybe I'm not unconferency enough since I have an agenda. But
that makes me think of one thing that might be totally off base, but it's something that a colleague of mine is maybe obsessed with, is too strong of a term, but you don't know him, so I can just say obsessed with, is this idea of like, so in decision science, right? Like how, which is very important and helpful information to have when you're doing data production, I think, of like how much better does the information need to be in what form for me to make a better decision, right? And this is something that we talk about in FE too, so Jess will be familiar with this, but I think there's a tendency on the researcher side, which is totally natural, to just want to make information better and better and better and better, which is great. And there's like really good sort of basic science reasons to do that. And if you're talking to decision makers, or if you want to co-produce something or co-design something, really important to ask, like, in what way does this need to be better? How much better? Does it need to be better, or does it just need to be more accessible? Right, those sorts of questions. And I don't know where Earth observation is at and where all the tools that come out of it are at with respect to that, but those can be really helpful questions to get feedback on from the decision maker, or from the person who's applying it, or from the user, because that's information you can't have if you don't know what the decision is being made, right? Like that is not at all something that you can just hypothesize about. Well, you can hypothesize, but you won't get the answer until you have someone who can actually tell you, like, oh, this is how I make my decision, that this is how I use that information, this is where I'm plugging it in, and this is the decision I'm making from it. Yeah. So Mary Ellen, I feel like that's really valuable information, actually, right?
oh yeah, I'm working hard to try to find all these people and stick them in a room, but then I don't really know what to do with them once they're in the room.
That's social science stuff.
Yeah, I'm an engineer, so I'm a little scared.
Yeah, well, collaborate with a social scientist. That's our bread and butter, right? Designing focus group questions and stuff in a scientific way, right? You're like, this is the answer or the data I need out the other side. How do I write a focus group discussion question so that when I'm analyzing my results, I'll be able to answer this question, or a survey or whatever is most appropriate.
So you'll help us get this, what you just said, you'll help us get those?
The social scientists?
Yeah.
I would be happy to help link you up with social scientists, sure. I have lists.
So, Kira, I have one question.
Yeah, go for it.
Realizing you won't be able to answer it like directly, maybe, but I think one question that we're going to face in the next week or two is how much time to spend in plenary and how much time to spend in these topical, potentially breakouts. Mm-hmm. Can you speak to that, if at all? I don't know if that's
I think as little time in plenary as you can. That, like, I guess, as with most things, like, why are you doing plenary? And then tailor it to fit that need, right? So if you're doing it because it's good to get everyone on like the same brainwave first thing in the morning, and you're like, you need to get everyone and they need to be together long enough to like lock in on team mode, that can be really helpful, right? So like some table setting, here we are all, this is what it looks like, go forth and co-create. But maybe you need 15 minutes to do that. Maybe you need 30. You probably don't need an hour, but somewhere between 30 minutes and an hour is usually, I think, enough to accomplish that goal. If there are other things that need to come across during plenary, like sometimes there's, just logistics announcements and updates and stuff. But then, yeah, if there's just any like key messages or like seeds that need to be planted in each day. But I would say like use plenary strategically for whatever goals you have for it. Or like if there's a nugget of wisdom that needs to come across, or like the second day plenary, if that's like a reorientation relaunch, then like maybe that one needs to be formulated differently, based on day one, right? There might be like a little bit more meat in that one. Day 2 and 3, I'm not sure. But yeah, I would say.
Can you elaborate on like why you suggest that minimal time in plenary? I have my ideas, but I don't know if they're the same as yours.
Again, I mean, I think it's like the goal of the conference. If this is I think people don't bond much over plenary, and they don't. It's not a great place to like leverage everyone's contribution, right? It privileges one person's contribution if it's a single speaker doing plenary. And I think that can be useful for, again, like, orienting and launching and like getting everyone aligned briefly. But I think more for like mission critical stuff. But I think other than that, plenary, if things aren't useful or if people know that they're not geared towards the goal, I think they just tend to space out more. No pun intended, but space people. But yeah, I think that's, it might not do harm to have it be longer, but there's probably a better use of everyone's time than sitting in plenary. Maybe I just don't like long speeches.
Maybe we can have lightning talks. This is like one of the best ways for NASA to tell the land managers about all the new cool stuff coming down the line.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of that sort of thing too. Especially if the lightning talks are good in that there's like a point that you're getting across, or a because lightning talks can get really overwhelming if they're too dense. But like a key figure, a key idea can be really helpful. Dana, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I was just wondering what you thought. I'm working on planning another workshop as well. And one of the ideas that we've been floating around was the idea of having people that want to convey information to a community bring a poster that's actually kind of, showing, okay, here's the information about one of these cool things that's coming down the pipeline, and then pass a microphone around and have everyone do like a 2-minute lightning talk with then time for kind of mixing and mingling, so people can then go and have conversations to engage maybe and get more information. Does that seem like something that could be effective? Anyway, I'd be interested to, yeah.
This is to clarify, so people have a poster and they give like a 2-minute lightning kind of pitch for their poster, and then there's like a poster session or something people can wander. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly. And trying to get the people that are presenting new data, or kind of, emerging ideas, to present them at a level where it's accessible, and then people can come and find out more from them kind of in a more rotating basis. Yeah.
I really like that. I'm blanking on where this was, but I feel like I've seen something like that, and it was really successful. And I think people ended up going to learn more about stuff that they knew less about before, instead of just gravitating towards the stuff that was like fully in their wheelhouse.
Yeah, like a little time, and with enough time, then you can kind of have people explore a little bit more in detail and hopefully ask the questions that they're personally confused about a little bit more easily.
Yeah. And you can have, I don't know how easy this is to do in the lightning session, but like the like teasers for what the person wants to be asked about the most, or like seeding the audience with like things to dig more on, can be a really helpful way to attract attention to the poster too, because it gives whoever's interested something to latch onto and like get into the conversation, which for introverts and others could be a really, really helpful way to, in contexts like poster sessions that are otherwise like introvert.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah.
Hanging back is great, and like reading something is fantastic, but having someone stand there and stare at you while you do that is horrible.
Let me just add, I think that we have, on the one side, NASA, which does a pretty good job of listing, missions, and then kind of exploring ways that those missions can contribute to Earth science and management decisions. I think it's harder for us to get, in formulating this agenda, is like, how do we summarize challenges for forest and rangeland management folks? What is the kind of challenge du jour, the challenge of the year? Whereas I think NASA has, excuse me, clearly articulated missions. Literally, they're sitting on top of a rocket, and they're going to be doing interesting science with that sensor. And it just gets kind of messy on the forest and rangeland management side. I can think of the wildfire crisis strategy is a big issue that's kind of taking a lot of time. There's climate change, but there's, I think a good example is the burn boss who lit a prescribed fire and is now being indicted for arson. This is like, wow, there's so many issues, and it's not like a better resolution LiDAR is going to help. But that's a bit tangential. So maybe, have you had any experience with this, as far as like you're bringing two communities together, and one of them is I have utmost respect for NASA and the strong management and strong sort of mission and kind of objectives, and then you got land management, and it's just a lot more messy. So I think we struggle with that in AEIOP, and we'll struggle with that at the meeting of how and what to present on the land management side if we want to do some sort of handshaking or general agreement. Maybe we focus on the NASA missions and think about how rangeland management could follow from those. But your comments earlier about, you got to really understand what question's going to be useful to them, what is going to help them, and maybe going from 30-meter to 10-meter resolution, isn't what they need. So how do we discern that, and how do we build it into the agenda, or build it into our structure?
It's a big question. It's a good one. So some things that kind of immediately come to mind, and this might not be, this is I can guarantee not a complete answer to your comments or questions, but sometimes, so the first thing is like, sometimes it's fine for things to be out of scope, and like, you know, we say we are two different agencies, we're all different people. That's not a problem we can solve today, and that's totally fine, right? And I think everyone understands that as long as you come together in like a sincere effort to do better together, it doesn't mean you're going to solve everything, right? Everyone's still going to have their own challenges on either side, and inescapable and also totally fine. I think it can also really be helpful to listen anyway, even if you're like, there's nothing I can do about that, but good to know. And if, as I go back to my job and go back to my whatever, I will now have that in mind. And if an opportunity comes up, and maybe this is like, timescales are very different, like maybe this is like 6 missions later, or I don't know if that's a long time. How many missions are there per year? 1,000, 2? I have no idea. But there can be that kind of relationship building where you acknowledge, like, there's nothing much I can do about that in this next mission or what have you, but thank you. And man, that sounds tough, like, can be a perfectly fine response. And it can be helpful, I think, if you are trying to maximize the value of the time together and like come to concrete things, to sometimes give categories of things that are flexible, or like places that where you might do change, right? So if it's like, things that we regularly change mission to mission are things like scale, right? Or like, not precision, what's the word I'm like, resolution. Or, is that, how frequently you get the same spot on the ground? Is it, what type of information you're collecting? I'm going to very quickly get into areas that are not my expertise here, but whatever those variables are that are more easily changed, obviously there's lots of work that goes into that, but that are more changeable, those can just be categories where you say, like, would changes to X, Y, or Z maybe be helpful? Or you just, like, you can ask about the input, say, like, what are you actually using these for now? And then, you can have the person who is on that mission or who is familiar with that technology be like, oh God, you should not be using that for that. That is a totally inappropriate use, but this other product would be better. Or, ooh, that would be great, but the key limitation is this. Is that meaningful for the decision that's being made? Or you can say, like, whatever those responses are, but just understanding how the tools are currently used, or so that the combination is like, tweaking or fixing what's already being done, existing decisions, current uses, making them better. There's also the suite of things, and these can be harder to get at, which is like the negative space of decision making, decisions that are either not using information at all to be made, and they're just being made based on inertia or whatever, or they're decisions that are being made using all sorts of different information that doesn't have anything to do with Earth observation, or I'm trying to think of what additional categories there might be, but that kind of thing. And then those are spaces where, like, you might be putting totally new sources of information into a current decision process. And that can be harder to map out because it's like the non-existent space, right? There isn't a current there. And so you have to like make one up. And that just involves a lot more conversation and figuring out what everyone is doing. But sometimes those can be, you can seed those conversations.
Yeah, you're making me think about, I've gone to some meetings where you want to get that high level picture, what's really kind of this agency cares about. And so then you get like some associate undersecretary that comes in for the first half hour, thank you, and then leaves, and it's like, I think the engagement, so we probably want to think about this from the Forest Service side or the land management side, as well as NASA, that it's not just, Jack K giving us the latest and greatest from NASA and leaving. It's like some people with the mission. I love Jack K, but, you want to have somebody that's going to, maybe if he can stay there for 3 days, we'd have him, but, I doubt he would. But you have, it's putting some things in the room that you're going to want to subsequently kind of hash out. I think we probably want to respect that as we formulate the agenda, and who can come and how long they can stay is probably a part of, that invitation to have them summarize some information.
Yeah. And I think I would just also encourage, like, anytime someone presents information, that there is either clearly articulated at the beginning or said at the end of each thing, like what, why are they giving that piece of information? What are they hoping they'll get feedback on? I think those sorts of things, like just hammering that home, like you're allowed to ask anything about this or push it. And the idea here, like try to leave your, I know this for like, I got better at it through my dissertation work, but like having things that I created be like my babies and, being worried that they were being criticized or weren't, saving the world. But that, the idea is to make things better or to just increase mutual understanding of what those things are and how they could be improved over time, even if it's not something that could be solved now. I think those can be really, that has just so much to do with like framing and the way things are like said or put forward or conceptualized, right? More than the thing itself. So.
Yeah. Makes sense.
Well, I hate to wrap this up, but we do want to respect Kira's time. And I think we've been really fortunate in that you've effectively served as a consultant for us for no pay. And we're very, very appreciative. I mean, this is a group of like volunteers who very few, if any of us, are kind of allocated time to work on these activities. So it really, truly is a grassroots program that is AEOIP. So Kira, thank you so much. And folks, please just respond to that when to meet survey. I'll send another email out and hopefully we can get this group and potentially some other folks to meet next week. And whoever is recording on the Forest Service side could probably stop recording.
Well, I think Everett dropped off, but once the meeting ends, it'll stop recording.
Okay. I just want to make sure it didn't like keep going in perpetuity.
I think it'll cut off unless somebody stays on the line. So everybody's got to leave.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I think you've given us a lot to think about.
Yeah, and
No
I'm
doubt.
happy to, hopefully it's been useful. I hope so. But if there's anything like specific, I've also done a lot of stuff on the side around like facilitation and mediation and like running good meetings and stuff like that. That has nothing to do with like my day job. It's just nothing's worse than being in a meeting that goes nowhere and you're like, God, where was the agenda? So yeah, but just specifics, I'm happy to provide my opinion about how things should go if there are specifics, but yeah.
Do you have any worksheets?
Co-production
for dummies.
I can look for some. I didn't, yeah. A lot of it's so high level as to be like, yeah, okay, I'll be nice. But yeah, I can try to find whatever's the most useful. Sure.
I think I read the right paper, but I'm not sure. It had like 42 different kinds.
Yeah, I mean, it's super variable, right, the space. So, but yeah, I can, like best practices for doing co-production. I can see if I can find anything like that. I haven't come across great resources yet, but I'll pass on whatever I find. I'll curate whatever I find and pass it on.
Awesome.
That'll be great.
All right. Well, Kira, we'll be in touch and iterate with you and try to use your time as wisely as possible.
Sounds good.
Yeah, many thanks.
Happy to help.
All right.
Bye.
See ya.